Okay, so again, thank you so much for meeting with me. Um, I heard your presentation when we went to Baton Rouge for LIAC, and I thought it was really awesome, especially everything you've been doing for the educational system in Louisiana, specifically with literacy. Um, and just a few questions about that. I wanted to know why you think literacy is specifically such a problem for Louisiana, or what is it about Louisiana's system that uh, facilitates, our poor literacy rates?
Yeah, I really don't think it's a specific problem to Louisiana. I mean, even if you look across the country, I mean, there's, even very well-funded, very wealthy areas struggle with literacy. And I think just in doing research on it, I think a lot of it is how we've kind of approached teaching reading in the last 20 or 30 years. We kind of moved away from phonics. There's this kind of whole language balance literacy that kind of took over. And it's really just fundamentally does not teach kids how to read. It's not effective at doing that. And so I think that was kind of an academically led push to kind of change how reading is taught, and it's really just been a failure. And I think Louisiana embraced that, like many places did. And I think now we're just kind of moving away from it and going back to kind of phonics that taught most people to read. So I think Louisiana is just catching up. So you might have heard in my presentation, it was my bills a lot of them were copied off of Mississippi. Mississippi did a lot of changes in 2013. Those changes were really copied off of Florida in 2003. So really, this is just kind of a movement that has happened and has been, I think, kind of progressing across the country, either on a state level or on a district level. And I was just trying to bring it to Louisiana. And that was kind of the purpose of a lot of the bills that I brought this year.
So the last session, you introduced a bill about phonics and another bill about keeping people in the third grade until they could read. And I know that bill failed. Do you have plans to bring it up in the next legislative session?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna bring it back. Yeah, it kind of got, so we really didn't have that much opposition throughout most of the process. And it was really like it got kind of hung up. It had to go to a Senate Finance Committee. So it kind of took twice as long to get to the Senate as we wanted. And then it kind of got caught up in procedural rules at the end. And then when it came up to a vote, there was like 3 people absent, so it failed. It has to get 20 votes to pass in the Senate, and it got 18, so it was 18-14. So it actually got majority of the votes that were present, but not enough people were there. And then at the end of the session, you have to get 2/3 to bring it back up. So I think it'll definitely pass. I'm going to bring it next year. I've already told everybody I'm going to bring it next year, and I think it's going to pass. I think it will pass. We had the votes last year to pass it, and like I said, it just kind of got hung up. But this year we'll push it harder throughout the process and hopefully be able to get it done.
And do you have any other new pieces of legislation in store regarding education for the next session?
We're working on it. Yeah, definitely. I think so. I have two kids right now that go to public elementary school here in St. Tammany. I have another one he's 4 right now. He'll go to kindergarten next year. And it's just something that I live it. So, I care a lot. A lot of people, I think, bring a lot of bills that are, maybe somebody brings it to them or some lobbyist or special interest says, hey, this is a good idea. This is all stuff that I just researched myself based on the struggles that I see, kind of in my own kids. So I think it's really a topic where Louisiana has ample opportunity to improve, right? We're like basically 50 or something, 48, 49, whatever it is. So we're basically in that bottom bracket in education. And I think that it's one of the things that you really don't need to spend a lot more money. Louisiana, we don't really have that much more money. Like, money is not necessarily the problem. It's really just how the policies of how we, what are we doing? How are we approaching instruction? How are we, structuring the teachers and administration, stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of issues that we can fix without spending a lot more money, because we really don't have any money. We got to fix it kind of by through that policy changes. And also, as everyone in the country is also trying to fix education. And so you can look at all these other states and see what they're doing and see what's successful. Like I said, copying off Mississippi and say, hey, look, Mississippi has gone from below us to above the national average. It's the greatest increase in literacy ever in the United States. They're obviously, Mississippi's not that different from us. So you can kind of look at those different states and really find out, what's working, what's not, and what you can use to apply in Louisiana.
And I wanted to know about, like, where did this personal interest come for you from education? Is it from just, seeing how your kids react to the educational system in Louisiana, or is it, from something else? Like, where did you get all these ideas to improve Louisiana's educational system?
Yeah, so my wife and I, when COVID happened, my oldest was in kindergarten, and so he kind of got, dropped on us to teach him how to read. And so we always thought, I mean, we read to him every night, and we were, involved in it, but we weren't really actively being like, you need to read this much every night. We weren't the ones primarily responsible for teaching him how to read. And then when COVID happened, he kind of got dropped on us, and it was like, yeah, now you are the ones teaching him how to read. And we switched him. We actually, because of the kind of COVID craziness that was going on in the public school, we actually put him in a homeschool hybrid program. And the whole time he was in public school, they had said, oh, he can read well. We're doing all of these tests, and he does really great. Like, don't worry about it. And then he went to go test into this, kind of quasi-private, quasi-homeschool deal. And she's like, oh, well, he can only read at 60%, 60% percentile or something. And so we were like, well, that doesn't really jive with what's going on. But that was kind of our impression as parents when we're reading with him, that he really couldn't read all that well. And so then he started at this, using this phonics-based curriculum at this school. And it was very quickly that he just took off and could read, and like in the course of 2 months, he went from, barely reading to, being an expert. And we saw the difference in the curriculum and how they taught it. And we kind of started doing research. We saw what Mississippi is. My wife looked into it a whole lot, and she was like, look, this is the problem, and this is where it is. And we kind of got introduced in this called the reading wars, right, about this kind of phonics versus this balanced literacy deal. And so you did a lot of research, saw what Mississippi had done and how successful it had been. And I mean, honestly, this year we really introduced that to Louisiana. It really was kind of an unknown subject in Louisiana, that Mississippi, right next to us, even though they had passed these changes in 2013, I was essentially unknown to the legislature or most people that Mississippi had done so well and improved so dramatically. This year I brought that bill, and it just kind of changed. Everybody recognizes now, hey, Mississippi is vastly, in front of us. Normally in Louisiana, we're like, oh, thank God for Mississippi. They're always behind us, right?
Right.
And this is one of those things where they're 10 years ahead of us in implementing these changes. And I think that's, if it wasn't for my personal experience and exposure to the problem, I would have probably never bought it. I would never looked at it. So it's just kind of fortunate that you have some people in the legislature that are, exposed to the challenges that everybody faces and can bring answers to them.
And amazing that you brought that from your personal circumstances and then, research more about it and then figured how to bring us up to speed, or a little bit up to speed with Mississippi. Another question I had was, obviously a big part of literacy is kids with learning disabilities like dyslexia. That makes it much harder to read. Do you have any bill or ideas for addressing that discrepancy between kids with dyslexia or kids without dyslexia?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big problem is that, at least in the public system, is that they don't catch kids with dyslexia. Like they basically find out, when they're in 7th grade or something like that, hey, the kid can't read still, and nobody's done anything about it. And so in that 3rd grade bill, there was a requirement that they get tested for dyslexia if they fall. If they do these reading assessments and they continuously do poorly in the reading assessments, that they get screened for dyslexia. And so that was a big part of that. And then there's another bill this year by Jason Hughes that required these 3 annual, or 3 reading assessments every year, like in the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and the end. And so I think as part of that, you kind of will have a better picture of where the kids are and how they're progressing in reading from kindergarten to at least 3rd grade, right? And I think when you're actually tracking and diagnosing where kids are, then you start to find those kids that really have dyslexia and need that specific training. The other thing is, there's, at least in St. Tammany, we just opened a charter school that I supported that focused on, it's called Louisiana Key Academy, and it's focused on just dyslexic kids. So it just serves as like the dyslexic community. So it kind of gives an option for those kids that are in public school to take that public money and go to a specialized curriculum where all the teachers are trained to teach dyslexic kids, and it just really helps them. So I think that's another way that you can do it, is when you have, I know they have Key Academy in Baton Rouge, and I think they're opening one in Shreveport as well. So it helps the population in general, gives them another option to kind of have that specialized reading instruction.
Yes, I've heard about the Louisiana Key Academy, and it's awesome that it's opening in your area, and that it's serving specifically dyslexic students, because traditionally they are the ones who fall behind the most. And especially in COVID, there was a big discrepancy again between what scores were before and then what scores were after. A lot of people fell behind. Can you just talk a little bit about, how we can make sure that how we keep kids up to date, how we make sure they don't fall behind if something like COVID, if we have to quarantine again? Like, do you have any ideas for that?
I mean, I think COVID was a disaster for kids. I mean, there's not really a way around that. I mean, I think virtual school is just not effective, especially if you're in the, poor demographics. You don't have parents that are there to teach you everything, hold your hand through the lessons, especially younger kids. I mean, it's just, I fought really hard to say that kids need to be in school. We didn't need to close down schools. We didn't need to, I recognized in the beginning that there was going to be the consequences that we have now. I mean, there's so many consequences that have
Right.
happened as a result of shutting down those schools that at the time we said, oh, well, whatever, anything that it takes, even if it doesn't, maybe it'll help a little bit. We need to do it. And I resisted that pretty strongly. That really the kids need to be in school. They need to be learning, because that's something that's going to have the effect forever. I mean, you're never going to catch. I mean, it's really difficult to ever get that time back. Louisiana was already struggling, and then to say, well, now basically a kid took a year off of school.
Mhm.
It's very, very difficult to get that back. I think that these reading programs that were put in place, the bills that I did pass, some of the bills the legislature has passed about focusing on reading, I think that will help, because it'll give extra instruction. It'll help them catch up to where they, hopefully where they should have been. I really think that third grade reading bill would have been a really great thing to have, because it kind of would have stopped. You're going to have a bigger problem now with kids who can't read moving forward through the system. And it would have stopped, at least at third grade, you would have caught all those guys and given them the extra training they need to learn, which now they're going to continue through the system. You don't learn to read in fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth grade. They don't teach you. They assume that you do, and really the teachers just struggle to teach the material that they need to teach in that year. And if they have to teach you to read as well, it's just as kind of a failure. And that's what we've seen. And we're going to have that problem going forward. But I think passing that third grade bill will help some. One of the things that I think really would be effective is year-round school. I think that year-round school is the way to go. I remember when I was a kid, they tried to tell us that we had to do year-round school, and we were like, absolutely not. And we fought it up and
Right.
down. I mean, like me personally, as like a middle schooler, I was like, I don't want to go to school. Don't take away my summer. But I think that when you look at the studies about how much learning loss there is over the summer, it's usually about 50%. Some of them say about 50% of whatever's taught to kids was lost over the summer that they have to teach again the next year. Well, that means if you switch to year-round school where there's not that big gap between, the one end of one year and the start of the other, you could essentially get 50% back, right? So without spending any more money, without spending any more time, you could basically have kids start 50% ahead of where they would have started in a normal system. So I think that that's really something that we should look at as far as a way to catch kids up. You can't tell them like, hey, we're going to go to school all, forever, a million days a year. But you can take that same number of days and just reduce the breaks, reduce the length of that break in the summer. Studies have shown that kids really can retain a lot more information, so they start ahead when they come back next year.
Mhm.
And I think that's really a good way to do it. So that's one of the things when you're asking me about what bills I possibly bring next year, something to kind of incentivize that or encourage that among the school systems, because I think that is something where you can really, it doesn't really cost any more money. It's just kind of a logistics problem, getting the kids to school and everything. But I think as far as a way to make sure that kids actually are able to catch up, because I mean, if they're not losing 50% every year, in 2 years you can get back an entire year that you lost in COVID. And I think that might be the kind of thing that you need to look at, kind of outside the box. But that might be where we need to go.
That's really interesting. I haven't actually heard it much or anything about that. So that is a very innovative idea.
Yeah, if you look at some of the research on it, it's pretty good. And I think also if you ask any teachers are like, we would love to have year-round school because it's such a hassle. And I think in Louisiana too is that we have I don't know, where are you from? Where do you live?
New Orleans.
New Orleans. So I mean, like we have hurricanes, right? And so the hurricanes all come like in late August or
Yeah,
September, like right
beginning of
after we
school.
started school.
Yeah,
And so it doesn't really make any sense that every year we start school, we're there for like a month, and then there's a hurricane and we're out for like 2 weeks at least,
exactly.
And so if you had year-round school, you could say, hey, guess what? We know that between August 15th and September 15th of every year, there's 2 hurricanes that will, they may not hit us, but they might threaten us and close things down. And it allows you to adjust the schedule so that you're like, look, we know that that's going to happen. We're going to be off that time anyway, because we're not, because really what happens is you come into school you basically have a month of adjusting, and then you're out again for 2 weeks, and then you come back, and you're like, you're not catching back just on that 2 weeks. It's like that first month never happened, and you start
Right.
all over again. And so I think, especially in Louisiana, where we have this constant hurricane threat, like in the same exact time period every year, having that year-round school that's not in the summer would help adjust, adjust to those, fluctuating school schedules.
Right, especially losing those weeks with Ida, like, trying to catch up, especially with, like, AP classes, like, trying to catch up to that, it's such a moving target, like, to try to catch up from what, everybody else is moving on, the rest of the world is moving on, but we still have to regain what we've lost from
Yeah,
hurricanes.
you're going to take the same AP test at the end of the year that
Right,
the kids in Massachusetts had to take. And so you lose, in Louisiana, I mean, what happens is we say, okay, well, don't worry about it. It was a hurricane. You don't have to make that time up. But, the AP test is still the AP test. You still got to take it. So same thing, ACT or whatever. So
right.
I think that having that flexible schedule, I mean, I personally, as a kid, summer, especially that last month of summer, is kind of miserable anyway. There's like nothing to do. It's really hot. You're running out of time. I'd rather just go back to school and then be like, guess what, go to school for a month or two. And there's a bunch of different schedules for that year-round school thing where you go for 90 days or go for 60 days and then take a break. And I think it's just, it's just a better way of doing business
Yeah,
than
and
that
that'd be really
huge break in
interesting
the middle of the year.
to look at, like, the mental health effects of that, of, like, having little breaks, like, not just a huge break and then no break, just, like, little breaks every now and then, for mental health, and especially with the hurricanes. That's a great idea. That'll be sure to research more. My other question was, I know you have a new bill about phonics, and I've heard there's some teacher pushback in other parts of the country, having to learn how to teach phonics. They're familiar with what they already have taught for years and years. Have
Mm-hmm.
you discovered any teacher pushback in Louisiana with teachers not wanting to teach this way? They want to teach the way they've always taught, or, any pushback with learning this new way?
Yeah, so I mean, I have brought two bills this year. So the two that passed, one of them said basically that you can't, it bans these curriculums that aren't effective in teaching kids to read. It basically says you essentially have to use a phonics-based curriculum. Funny story about that. So this weekend or this week, I was at an event, and one of my colleagues in the House came up to me and he said, "Oh, well, one of my constituents, who's a school board member and a retired teacher, came to me and said, 'What have you done?' And he's like, 'Oh, well, I don't know what he's talking about.' He's like, 'You passed this bill that says we can't teach this.' Yeah, it's called the three queuing system, visual memory. So it's basically, instead of phonics and trying to sound out words and decode what the word sounds are, it basically, you just look at the word and guess based on the letter or the pictures or the context. You're
Mm,
just trying to guess the word. And that's it's just been scientifically proven to be a terrible way to teach kids to read.
right,
So anyway, this teacher came to him and who's on the school board now, and says, "Oh, I can't believe you passed this. This is how we teach kids how to read. How can we teach them how to read without this?"
right,
And he had to very delicately tell her, like, actually, all the research shows it's not really a great way to teach kids how to read, and it really causes a lot of problems. So I know that there's been pushback to that one. I thought that was kind of funny, but it's that bill was actually modeled off of a bill that passed in Arkansas, which was just said you can't use these kind of curriculums anymore because they don't teach kids how to read. I kind of joke it's like bloodletting, right? Like somebody coming in and being like, "Hey, look, why are you stopping bloodletting? Like we've been doing
right,
this forever, and like all this is how we treat cancer patients. We do bloodletting." And you're like, "Well, actually, it kills people, and it's been doing it for a long time, and you just didn't realize it." So that one particularly, I think, probably has more pushback because it's immediate. The other one is the teacher basically for the teacher certification. They have to take a phonics-based, a more comprehensive phonics-based instruction test to show that they know how to teach phonics in order to be a certified teacher. And that hasn't really been implemented yet, so there's not as much pushback. I put it like I think maybe a year before it was implemented, so they had time to like pick whatever test they're good. The Department of Education had a year to pick whatever test they want to use, and kind of adjust the curriculums from the school universities that are teaching it. But that was a major problem in Mississippi. So that was another lesson learned from Mississippi, is that so they
mm,
passed the third grade retention bill in 2013, and they recognized that even though they had passed this bill and encouraged teaching phonics and the science of reading, that a lot of the academics that were teaching new teachers in the universities were not on board, because they'd said, we've been teaching this balanced literacy, we've been teaching this three queuing, we've been teaching this for
right,
years, and we're not changing. I don't care what you think, legislature. And so they said, well, okay, well, now we're going to have this as part of the certification test. So if any of your teachers are going to pass the certification test, they're going to have to be able to do this. And that was kind of a way to get that pushback. And then they went and actually, educated the professors and, brought them on board and said, hey, let's go through this training to show you why the science of reading is the way to go. And those are things we've kind of already done. We kind of half approached a lot of the things that Mississippi did. We've kind of done a lot of them already. And this was just kind of one of those another step that we took in that direction so that, we could hopefully have the same or similar results.
That's awesome. And my other question was, you've spoken a lot about, well, in our presentation, you spoke a lot about how we have a high incarceration rate, actually the highest incarceration rate, I think.
In the world,
And
yeah.
I think a large part of that is illiteracy. Can you speak a little bit about how our high rate of illiteracy affects our high rate of crime, if there is any effect?
Yeah. So, I say, reading is a fundamental issue, right? Like we talk about lots of stuff in the legislature, like it doesn't really make any difference if we, whatever, tax gasoline 2 more cents or something like that. It
Right.
matters somewhat, but this is a fundamental, reading is a fundamental thing. Like, we have 1,000 different programs for universities and everything else, but if kids can't read, like they're not going to go to university, they're not going to get a job, like probably not going to graduate from high school, and there's much higher likelihood of ending up in jail, right, committing crimes. And it's really just, if you can't read, what happens is the kids start to think, I'm not good enough. School isn't for me. They'll probably end up dropping out. A lot of them end up dropping out of high school. Once you drop out of high school, your options of how to get gainful employment are pretty limited. And so what do? Well, they're probably in a poor neighborhood. And so they, learn to survive the way they can. It's just generally through crime. So it really causes all these trickle-on effects that, hey, if all these kids could read, it would be a whole new world. I think I went to the St. Tammany Parish Jail and I asked him, like what percentage, what percentage do you think can't read? And it's like, he said 30% can't read a word, like probably can't read anything. And then, most of them that are there though have struggle in reading, right? Most of them struggle. And so it's really one of these things that just kind of compounds and really limits the effects. And it's, something that we can fix. It's not, the kids are all in school. We could teach them how to read if we tried, and if we had the right curriculums, and we had the right structures in place. And that's why that third grade reading gate, it really is important in getting the teachers and the students and the parents and the systems. It puts everybody in the same focusing on the same goal of saying, hey, by the time you leave third grade, you're going to be able to read. And it just has a drastic effect on all of those things, including incarceration, which you're going to, even if it costs more money to teach kids how to read, it'd be better to do it then than to have them, wait for them to commit some crime and then throw them in jail and then try and teach them how to read. Because I had another bill to say, to encourage, teaching reading to prisoners, right? Once they're already incarcerated. But, I'd rather get them when they're 5. Yeah. So, yeah, like I think I said, I think it was Frederick Douglass that said it's easier. Yeah. It's easier to grow strong men, or it's easier to make strong boys than it is to fix broken men, or something like that.
Right.
And that's that's really the idea, is that it's much cheaper and much better for everybody in society to make them read initially than to wait until they get into the justice system and then try and teach them.
Well, thank you so much. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I did want to ask you if there's anything that you want to add, or anything that you have an interest in that you want to speak about, or one of your bills that you want to speak about, just anything to add.
Yeah, no, I think, this reading, I always said that I was not going to touch education issues just because there's not that clear of an answer, right? I was always like, oh, I generally like tax policy, because taxes, there's a pretty good, you can look at other states and say this works, this doesn't. You kind of look at it and economic lens and say this is effective. In education, I was always like, I'm not going to touch education. I don't see there's anything. And my wife really was the one that was like, you got to do stuff on education.
Right.
Like you're the only, your kids are in the schools, like you're the one that can see the problems, like you got to go do it. And really it was, it's just kind of fortunate that there actually is an answer. Like I was just never looked into it enough, I think, to find out what the answer was. But,
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to do it this time. And I think that this literacy stuff is, really the way to go. I think that there's another, the other big important thing I think to look at is, how we structure the college, the college and career track. I think that that's kind of a mess. We really need to encourage kids to go to these kind of, career and technical colleges to get them the skills they need so they can, get out and make, they go out and make $50,000 a year out of high school, as opposed to going or get with a 2-year degree, associate degree, as opposed to getting a bunch of student debt, going to a 4-year university,
Right,
getting a degree in English, and then
right,
like going to
right.
work at the Gap. Like, I mean, it's not the way to go. So I think that's another big, kind of important avenue that we got to look at is, how do we encourage kids to go down that career track when college is really just kind of being a waste of time. I think that's especially in Louisiana, where we have a lot of those jobs, we have a lot of that demand for those technical jobs. We really don't have any way to fill them. And so I think addressing a couple of those problems would really go a long way in fixing a lot of the problems we have in the state. If we just, if Louisiana was just average, we'd all live 3 years longer and get a 33% raise. So I keep trying to etch us up to that national average to get us, that 3 years of our life back and a 33% raise.
Well, I absolutely agree with everything you've said, and I really wish you the best in bringing all your bills up because I think they're so important, especially for our state, for the youth of our state, for the future of our state, to keep people in our state. And I just really want to thank you for, meeting with me on a Sunday. Like, that's so amazing that you would do this. And I just
So no
thank
problem.
you.
No problem. Yeah, no, I mean, I think, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you being involved. I mean, it's, you ever read the Dr. Seuss book, The Lorax? You ever read The Lorax?
Yes.
It's like, unless people like you care a whole awful lot, things are not going to get better. It's not, it's what it is.
Yeah.
So
Love a Lorax quote.
yeah, no, Dr. Seuss, he's pretty, my favorite doctor. So, but anyway, no, I appreciate it. And, I don't mind doing it on a Sunday. It's, like I said, it's a full-time, it's the best part-time job I ever had. So
Well, anyway, thank you. I know it's been 30 minutes and I only promised you 30 minutes, so I don't want to take up any more of your time. But just thank you again. We'd love to when we go to Baton Rouge, just next year if I do it again, I'm gonna thank you again. Anytime I see you, I'm gonna thank you because this is so awesome.
yeah, no problem. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you again. All
All
right.
right. All right,
Bye-bye.
Sarah. Have a good day.
Thanks.